You didn't see it coming. Well, you probably did. You just didn't know what you were looking at. That sigh, that tapping foot, that glance away, those were the warning signs. Invisible escalation is only invisible until you know where to look. And just like a roller coaster, once you're climbing that first hill, you can't stop the drop unless you step in early. If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Hello and welcome back to the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today we're lifting the lid on one of the most preventable causes of crisis, not spotting the early warning signs. There's so many incidences I hear about and come across that are described afterwards of it happened out the blue. They're like Jekyll and Hyde. He just seems to just switch. But in my experience, and when you really investigate, the research shows they rarely are out the blue. The early signs are there, but they're hiding in plain sight, what I call the bottom of the escalation roller coaster. Now, if we step in at the bottom of the roller coaster, before the click, 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 that steep climb up, we can get things smooth and safe. It's easy to get off when you're at the bottom of the roller coaster. It's so much harder. You're on the ride or you're at the top of that first big hill. Today, I'm going to show you what we're going to look for, why catching it early is everything, and how to act in those most crucial first moments. So we'll talk about the roller coaster escalation and the model that explains the sort of early signs, and we'll recognize universal and individual micro cues and respond in ways that prevent rather than provoke. There's an example I sometimes reuse. Right, let's say that you were meeting a friend at the cinema. You'd arranged to meet them at 8 o'clock. The film started you've managed to meet them at 7:45. The film started at 8 o'clock. And it's now 8:05. You may feel frustrated to start off with. You're worried about them. So there's an emotional part that's starting to kick in, but you'll start making excuses for them. Maybe the traffic's bad, maybe they're stuck in traffic, maybe they haven't messaged me because they're still driving. So you manage your own emotions at that point. Next stage would be, let's say another 10, 15 minutes later that you still haven't heard from them. Now your emotional brain's going to start taking over, and all those excuses you made up for them are out the window. They should have found somewhere to park by now. The traffic's not that bad out there. If they're going to be this late, they should have found somewhere to let me know. Or maybe you're really worried about them and getting anxious and really overwhelmed. So let's say they then turn up and they don't offer you a valid excuse or reason. You may become actually quite emotional towards them. Where have you been? I've been worried sick. If they sent you a text message when you were still just at the frustrated stage, they'd have a much better chance of meeting a nicer you when they arrived. The further up that roller coaster that you got, the harder it is for you to immediately re-regulate. You might still be calm with them, but there'd still be a little bit of like, okay, but I still should let me know. There'd still be a little bit of bite to what you're saying. So the earlier we intervene, the better the chances of success. But often people are kind of confused. It happened out of the blue, whatever. We miss the early cues. And we end up very quickly in the danger zone where behavior is harder to manage. People are more likely to get hurt, and the relationship takes longer to repair as well. In things like the crisis development model, highlights the anxiety phase as a key intervention point. In Polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges, it tells us the nervous system shifts long before overt aggression or shutdown. the alarm bell in the brain is going to start going off, and we may not recognize the early stages. Dan Siegel's window of tolerance shows that earlier intervention keeps people at their optimal learning and coping zone, keeps a lid on the bottle of Coke. But once we're past that first bit, we miss out on opportunity. So early intervention or early recognition is the brake system. We're thinking about the importance of that early stages. Why do some people it can be difficult? For some individuals, if they don't recognize that they're getting angry, they don't recognize their emotion, either due to sensory processing issues where interoception is not something they pick up on very easily, or they've never been modeled as far as how to regulate, or all emotions are perceived as anxiety provoking, it might mean they don't recognize their emotions early stages. So we all have that sudden burst of, somebody makes us mad. We feel that little burst of adrenaline, our heart rate starts to go up. What we do is we intervene, we manage it, we sit on our hands, we take some deep breaths, we control and regulate our behavior. But for some individuals, they just don't have that time period, those inhibitors. So the roller coaster, that click, click, click happens much, much quicker. They go from low levels of partial regulation emotion to suddenly being off the chart. It seems like on a dime, but there is some indicators showing those early stages of escalation. The most important thing for us to be able to recognize it is knowing a person's baseline state. If we don't know what they look like when they are calm, it's going to be really difficult for us to recognize and predict when they are getting uncalm. So baseline is a person's normal state when they're fully regulating. This includes things like their posture, their tone, how fast do they talk, what kind of facial expressions do we tend to find, and movement. Without it, you can't spot the change. Now, as you get to know somebody, or if you're working with somebody regularly, you'll start to pick up on these cues. But for a new staff member coming into an environment, for instance, it'd be really useful for them to be able to read, this is what this person looks like when they're calm. This is how their usual communication levels. They're usually quite fast speaking. They're usually quite vocal. They usually engage and smile and make eye contact with you. So they can then recognize anything outside of that, maybe a sign of agitation, distress, or a change in emotion to some degree, allowing us to better monitor. We may need to notice the early cues. Now, typically, if we think about the alarm bell going off in the brain as a person going towards our fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses, we're going to see some changes in our physiology. So blood flow, if we're getting into fight or flight, we're getting agitated, we're getting anxious, then we're going to find that blood flow needs to increase the larger muscle groups. So that's going to be our legs and our arms. But parts of the body are shut down as far as the blood flow. We don't need to be digesting food. We don't need to be communicating as effectively. So these are all signs we might see change. So early warning signs might be just tapping, fidgeting, increased self-stimulating behavior, anything where we're seeing an increase in movement to some degree. We might find as well there's changes in eye contact that they'd normally make. And that could be if they start staring at you, it might mean they really like you or they really don't like you. But it could also be if they're refusing to gauge your eye contact. Again, it's outside the norm. That could be an indication of distress. Maybe we're finding we're getting shorter answers, monosyllabic communication. Yeah, no, so. Just short answers and clipped speech. Again, we might find that's an early warning sign. Somebody struggling to concentrate, struggling to focus, can also be an indicator of anxiety or distress. Unusual silence from a talkative person is another kind of warning sign. But some people will talk faster and talk louder and be more animated. But we might also find we get increases in self-soothing behaviors. Some individuals will have some idiosyncratic behaviors. I worked with a guy who started singing. That was a warning sign. Some people whistle. Some people start smiling. Some people have a certain trait or behavior they do with their fingers that might be a warning sign. And sometimes that's them trying to self-regulate, trying to calm themselves down, whether it works well or not. But looking out for those early warning signs is vital. But the big thing about noticing those early warning signs is that then I need to do something about it. So often I sometimes find staff, care staff, teachers, whatever, they may notice the early signs, but they put those down as low priority because they feel there's things that are more important going on right at that moment. I haven't got time for that because I'm dealing with this right now. The problem is being ignored is only going to potentially trigger escalation. Hoping that somebody else will do it may mean that they're going to escalate. And if they escalate, we're going to end up with an incident that will take us far longer to be able to manage and de escalate. There is so many people out there saying, oh, if only we had more time. But if they were more proactive rather than reactive when it comes to managing behaviors, they would save themselves so much time. If they noticed the early signs of a person getting agitated, they acknowledged it, supported it, redirected it, and followed the models that we use within our system, whether it be heart or head shoulders, whatever it is, they'd be able to de-escalate the situation more quickly. But what they do is they put it as low priority. They let it get to the point of suddenly now it's going to be 10 times harder to de-escalate this. The person has gone into a full dysregulated state. And then we're going to have to manage it, de-escalate it, which is going to take longer. But then having to write up an incident report afterwards for another 15, 20 minutes. If instead, maybe all they wanted was a drink, or they just needed a little bit of attention for a couple of minutes, or redirecting away from the space. And it may have taken them 30 seconds to do that, but instead they left it until the crisis point where suddenly then it's going to take them an hour plus to deal with. So when we notice it, we need to then take action. So when you notice those early warning signs, we need to make sure we respond, but gently. We should always respond, not react. We might do what we call verbal attending. Now, verbal attending is where we just notice something about the person's behavior, and we just notice it, mention it, and in a non-judgmental way. I notice you tapping your fingers. Everything okay? You seem a little unsettled. I'm just wondering if there's anything I can do to help. I notice you've gone a bit quiet. Is everything all right? Do you want a quick break before we carry on? Do you want something to eat before we do? Just doing something gently, not confrontational. Why are you getting irritated? Why are you getting frustrated? Just encourage them to take alternative actions. We also may need to go through our de-escalation model. Always remember, we use a principle called help, prompt, wait, protect. And the early warning signs is there anything I can do to help? Is there something the person's needs? Is there something that's stressing them? Can I eliminate that before they carry on going up on their journey, emotional journey? Is where we have that opportunity in those early stages where connection, co-regulation comes in. Your calm tone, body language acts as a brake on that roller coaster. Having somebody empathizing with them, whatever that emotion is, can help them feel they're being seen and connected. So then they don't need to escalate up to communicate they're not happy because somebody is genuinely seeing them and hearing them in that moment. We also want to try and have tools that we can use to help a person to come off the roller coaster. And this might be very individualized approaches depending on the person, that we know what works for them. And the ideal would be proactively, we've got a list of this helps them to calm. They like this music. They like this space. They like doing this activity. Any activity that we know they're quite likely to engage in, but that's counter to getting upset and getting agitated. And that allows us to then prompt an incompatible behavior. So it could be changing the activity if they're struggling, adjusting the environment or adjusting sensory input to help them to regulate if they're struggling with that, providing a calming tool or a calm space or calm people around them to be able to then manage. Using any breathing techniques, grounding techniques, anything like that, or offering them choices to allow them to calm. Sometimes people worry about intervening in the early stages is because won't it make it worse? Not if you do it with no judgment. You're describing what you see, you're not accusing. If I'm pointing out somebody's emotions, if I'm approaching it from a why are you getting angry, or confrontationally requesting, making them feel like they have to justify themselves, they're being judged, they're being criticized, then yeah, that's going to escalate. Instead, I'm coming from a position of genuine curiosity, understanding, I'm here to help. These are all things that are going to decrease the likelihood of escalation. Time is one of those factors, I've already said. You don't need to monitor constantly. You just need to know what people's baselines are and then keep an eye out for any deviations from that. It's about being mindful of the environment you're in, what's going on. It's being situation aware as well. So many of us sometimes are caught in code white, which is where we're thinking about other stuff. What jobs I've got to do when I get home, or what am I cooking for tea tonight, rather than being present in the moment with the people that I'm supporting. I know there's also the premise of this. Maybe there's a perception people should be able to control themselves. But please understand that regulation, emotional regulation, is a skill that some people have never been taught, and some people struggle to learn. Some people will lose those skills at certain points in life when they're going through certain experiences, and certain people are losing them due to conditions, deterioration, and changes in where their brain works. If you could regulate independently every time, they wouldn't be escalating in the first place. So think about times that you've not managed to manage your emotions. There may have been things that held you back from acting out in the same way, but we're all capable of getting angry. It's normal, it's human. But other people around you noticing and helping to de escalate you rather than escalate you is where the true role of caregivers, teachers, support workers is helping people to control themselves, not to control them. So this week, what I'd like to do is notice where somebody at the bottom of that roller coaster, or the first couple of shakes on the bottle of Coke, or the first couple of marbles into their window of tolerance, whatever analogy it is you're using for the people you support. What are the subtle signs before the climb begins, before they start escalating? How can you recognize when the embers are just starting to warm rather than when they're starting to burn? Step in there. And you're not just preventing incidences, you're actually protecting relationships. We build trust through people who are able to recognize us, acknowledge us, guide us through managing our emotions and our outcomes. So think of a recent out of the blue incident. Where on the roller coaster did it actually start? Were you able to notice? I will just finish off with one little story that I remember seeing on a documentary where it was a school where they were describing this lad as he would just switch. He would just start acting out. There was no precursors. It came out the blue. And the TV or the film crew actually was sitting at the back monitoring this lad's behavior. And the teacher only really noticed it when he started running up and stealing board pens and acting out and being really disruptive. But you could see quite clearly there was a lot of early indicators, dropping something on the floor and then picking it back up again, just jostling a little bit more than he had before, getting up out of his chair a couple of times and then sitting back down. Nothing was big enough to draw attention properly, but they were your pre-warnings. They were the precursors. And if something had been managed then, they wouldn't have had the entire class then having to deal with a dysregulated individual or disruptive behavior because it had been noticed in the early stages. And that's easier said than done. You know, for any teacher who's having to monitor 30 kids in a room. But sometimes we just need to get in that mindset, know what we're looking for. A good example of this is like the Think Bike campaign. If anybody knows that, search it on YouTube. Watch one of the awareness videos of the Think Bike campaign. They brought that out because people kept pulling out on motorcycles and cyclists because they were looking for cars and therefore they didn't notice the bikes. When they did the Think Bike campaign, all it was to get drivers thinking about bikes. And suddenly they then started noticing them and less likely to pull out in front of them. So I want you guys to think about that roller coaster. Notice the early signs of escalation to give you the best chance, seeing it coming and manage the situation before it arrives.